You were born in Kingston upon Thames in 1955. It's a suburb of Greater London. And what was your childhood like growing up there?
It's very normal suburban life, really, just on the edge of the city. So it was one of those things that, you know, you're only kind of 5 miles out of the heart of London, so you were always very aware of what was going on around you, but at the same time you were kind of far enough removed not for it to be a lifestyle.
Happy childhood?
Pretty good, you know. I moved around a bit between being brought up by my grandparents and then moving in my father and my stepmother, so that was kind of okay. And then they moved out and went very kind of rural on me, about sort of 20 miles out of town, and that was another sort of set of perspectives on the world.
You moved with them, did you?
Well, kind of, yeah. And they moved out to Red Hill, and then I was still going to school in Putney, which again was a kind of full-on train journey every day. But it got me very used to sort of nipping up and down on the trains, and it gave me a train pass, which was really good. So when I got a bit older, it seemed I could go up to the Roundhouse and watch bands. Now,
you got hold of a toy drum kit after you enjoyed seeing your hero, jazz drumming soloist Eric Delaney, on TV playing on Saturday night at the London Palladium.
Sunday night.
Oh, was it then?
Palladium.
Oh, right. Yeah, well, I'll do it again. Yeah. Sunday night at the London Palladium. It was kind of like that. What was it about Eric's playing that drew you towards wanting to play drums yourself?
I didn't really know who he was at all until I saw him on TV that fateful night. I'd already kind of heard the drums on the radio and things, you know, and I'd already fallen in love, but I'd never actually seen a drummer. And there was this guy on stage who used to use 2 bass drums, and he kind of ran the whole show as a drummer, and he was just like a real showman, you know.
Yeah,
kind of
right.
I'd fallen in love with the instrument with a passion, and I didn't really have much, you know, there was no turning back. It was just the decision was made, and it's kind of, when I think about it now, it seems kind of odd because, you know, I was 8 years old.
Yeah.
Who listens to an 8-year-old apart from another 8-year-old?
Can I just check with you there? Then it wasn't the Sunday night of the London Palladium experience. It was before then. You know,
there used to be like a jazz quiz show on every Sunday afternoon or something, and pretty much every jazz song had a drum solo in it. And so I'd sort of heard this thing, and then I'd already got this kind of fascination with the sound of it and everything. And my grandparents kind of got it. And then, because Sunday night at the London Palladium was, you know, you went to bed when that came on. Suddenly I was allowed out of bed, and there it was with shiny cymbals and bright lights.
An absolute wow factor.
Yeah.
Now, you got hold of your first proper drum kit at 10. Honestly, people that are listening to this guy is a very talented musician. We'll talk about your new album later on. But I like asking artists this because you guys are so talented, and people often answer this by saying, oh, I just picked it up. But how did you first learn to play the drums?
It's a very frustrating process, as I remember. It was because you'd hear things going on, but wouldn't have the physical coordination to do any of it. That was kind of intimidating, you know, because you'd hear something and then you try and play it and you wouldn't be able to. It really was just that, you know, blind perseverance and bullishness of refusing to be beaten, because you kind of understand that if somebody else can do it, then you must be able to as well.
Listening and watching then, rather than having lessons in how to play a paradiddle.
Oh, you couldn't get drum lessons. There was no such thing in those days, no. I mean, even to the point of the only places you could were like, there were 2 other places where they taught music, which was at school, which was the school orchestra. They wouldn't let me play the drums because everybody wanted to be a drummer. And the other option was the local Sea Cadets, who I joined. But of course, everybody still wanted to be a drummer, and so I ended up playing cornet. And I was playing trumpet as well in the school orchestra. Much as I didn't want to be a brass player, that was the only thing that you could do. So I kind of studied music for a while and decided, you know, music was where I wanted to be. Then I discovered, of course, that I hadn't done well enough at mathematics.
No, I wanted to ask you that, because I know you played the trumpet in the orchestra until the 4th year, but you feel very strongly, don't you? You weren't encouraged at all musically, because you weren't in the right stream to take O-level music. But the thing is...
Yeah, that's right.
How do you regard your schooling looking back now, though?
It was the thing that probably gave me, if I can say it, you know, my very first fuck you attitude. Because it really was a case of I decided, and everybody knew. I mean, the head of the music department, you know, everybody knew that actually that was what I wanted to do and what I'd be good at. But, I remember going to see the careers officer. I said, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to be a drummer, So I kind of laughed, why don't you join the army?
Oh, yeah, right. That's obvious from saying you want to be a drummer.
Yeah, so I was like, well, I don't really, and again, I was up against everything because I didn't have any other kind of results or grades behind me that qualified me for anything other than menial office or factory work. So that was kind of what happened to me, really, was I left school with this burning ambition to be a drummer, and then I just kind of chased down every opportunity I ever could become one.
I'm intrigued by that answer, because I must admit you come across, from what I can see with interviews and read about you, as a very bright bloke who's very much their own person. So I've got this theory that with that focus that you show clearly with drumming, I think you could have found something that you enjoyed there, Chris.
Could have been Prime Minister.
Well, there you go. Why was there so much on the drums for you, even as a young bloke?
First of all, I could do it. I sort of got over the initial hurdle, so I could play a bit. That kind of went a long way. And also, there was a lot of what do you do at home, apart from shoot air rifles, and bash the drums.
Yeah, right.
So it meant I got to play quite a lot. And I got to be quite a good shot.
Yeah, right.
So it kind of, the boredom fueled the playing and vice versa, really. I was just stuck with it. I was bitten, and that was it. It was in, and I standing outside music shops and looking at cymbals and drum kits and just wishing that one day you could have one, And it was really, it was a real, I wasn't going to do anything else. It was either that or crime, and I wasn't very good at that. So. And then I guess it was, the lucky break was when I finally did meet up with Brian James, and 1975 sort of kick-started everything.
I know school was less than ideal for you, but you were allowed to practice.
What they did let me do was, me and another drummer, we used to have my kit at the school, and we used to practice in lunchtimes in the main assembly hall, which, kind of was convenient. I'm not sure how we worked that out, but I think because there was two of us that had an interest. Oh shit, I came out, I had loads of really awful jobs. Everything from working on building sites to selling insurance to working as a, you name it, I did it all as a petty thief, and then gradually had certain good friends and some help, a band that kind of was people at school called TARP, which was my first proper group. And luckily they were really, they might have put me on the straight and narrow and pointed out I was only going to end up in one place if I didn't get my act together. And in the background, everybody was still telling me, well, you'll never make it as a musician. Nobody does. It doesn't really matter how good you, the usual comment. Not that anybody was being negative. I think people just try and cushion you for the fall, So, and there was kind of a lot of that going on, and I was sort of starting to believe it a bit. But I did go to a couple of auditions, nearly got the job, so I kind of knew I was actually okay, and I could play well enough. And so that sort of helped. And like I say, when it came to the band thing, really, the audition for London SS at the time I was playing drums. It was my first professional gig, was in a production of Puss in Boots, a pantomime. Because
I'd read that a friend's father ran a theatre company.
I worked for him as well as a stage manager, because it was quite a good way of getting me out of it. Because I was still kind of homeless, so I was sort of crashing on people's couches and, just doing that thing that you do. And it was actually the guitar player who ended up with Johnny Moped, Slimy Toad. It was his father who ran the theatre company. And because I was sort of doing a bit of playing with Slimy, then he ended up giving me some work, because I was kind of cheap and convenient, and I didn't mind sleeping in the back of the truck. And
eventually you got Rot together, didn't you?
Yeah, that was the band with Slimy. It was right. He wasn't called Slimy then, his name was Simon. It wasn't actually called Rot, it was called Tor, but I thought that was such a punchy name.
Oh, really?
I didn't want to ever tell anybody.
Around that time, the pre-punk period, the music scene in the UK was dominated by pit-up pop of David Cassidy, glam, and music that later became known as prog. I mean, because you were actively playing, what did you think about the music scene around then? I
always felt like you'd find out, because I never liked a whole King Crimson record, but I liked 21st Century Schizoid Man. I didn't like a whole Status Quo album, but I liked the single. Kind of dug Mark Bolan and the Sweet as well. And which, again, was, because England was very tribal at that point. And it really was football. You were kind of a football hooligan, or you were a disco
Yeah.
fan, or you were, difficult to fit in. And it was a musical thing. If you weren't a heavy rock fan, if you didn't look like a heavy rock fan, you couldn't really go to rock shows and things. And I used to like dipping in and out of small pieces of it, like something like, Born and Blitz, or, Get It On.
I get you. Just parts of it.
But that would alienate me from my friends that were into listening to Marvin
You're
Gaye.
your own person, aren't you? Let's be honest with you. Yeah.
It also sort of left me always feeling a bit like I'd never really fitted in with any of those other social groups. And even though a lot of the people I got on with, it was kind of like it was either the clothes were wrong or the hairstyle was wrong, or
something.
The attitude was wrong.
Eventually, you answered the Melody Makers advert that turned out to be from the subsequent Clash manager, Bernie Rhodes, to play in London SS, which you've mentioned just now. I want to know, what was it like in those days, playing with Mick Jones of the Clash?
He was a very different kind of guy then. He was a big Not the Who fan and looked as though he could have been in the band. It was quite interesting because you could sort of tell that Mick had something going on, but it wasn't going to be his guitar playing. But he had the spark. You could tell actually what he did. He did have his own little sort of charm and magic about it, which I always kind of liked. And it was one of those, he was an outsider, but Brian was the one that kind of had really nailed it. He was the one that absolutely knew what punk was supposed to be and what it was about. And, he had the short hair and, nickel pickers and drainpipe jeans and stuff. And all the MC5 records and all the Stooges records. And, they were just kind of like legendary figures to me. I'd only heard one or two tracks of each band, so it was he was quite a discovery. And I immediately we locked in with the way we played together. So it just seemed quite logical that we should sort of do something.
Mick christened you Rat Scabies because of the scabies you had, whilst the scabies part may be negative, as you could argue, it drew attention to your scabies. Today, Rat Scabies, it's neither positive or negative. I mean, how do you feel about being known by the public as Rat Scabies rather than Chris Miller?
It's a funny one, really, because I always wondered how much of the applause Rat Scabies got and how much of it Chris Miller got. There's always kind of a certain amount of schizophrenia that goes with having an outlandish stage name, so it was, and I always kind of would credit it to the fact that it was the band that were getting the applause, probably more than I was, and it was the band, and it was it was the big thing that people really liked, as opposed to any one of the individual parts more than any of the others. I always felt that all the cheering was for the group. Yeah. And, not necessarily for me. It was quite strange when I worked with Donovan for a little while.
Yeah.
And he wouldn't call me Rat.
Right.
He'd always call me Chris, which was quite cool. And then
you've got to be in the Damned,
we used to do one
almost. Yeah, I got you. Yeah, that's interesting.
But we did do this first kind of show, and we used to do, and it was kind of solo bit, and Don had introduced the band, and he introduced me as Chris Miller, and people applauded. And that was pretty much the first time in my professional career I really felt it was me that was getting some kind of recognition.
And in a way, did you get a much? Yeah, I got you. Did you get a much bigger buzz than you would normally get? Because it was you, it's Chris.
Yeah, it was a very big buzz. It was a very kind of wow.
They know me.
I've got there on my as me, as opposed to a kind of assumed identity. Almost.
Yeah. Well, as we say over here in Australia, good on you. Quite a number of people passed through the doors of London SS. Why did you leave that band?
I got on well with Mick, but Tony didn't really dig me too much. I think he thought I was too suburban and had the wrong trousers on. But Brian immediately sort of, he said that as he told me, they were fed up with looking. They'd been trying to find a drummer for months, which I knew to be true because I'd seen the advert running for a long time before I answered it, so I knew that was the case. And he just sort of said, look, enough's enough. Either we have this guy in the band or I'm going to go and form a band with this guy. And that's what happened.
Yeah, I get you, because you're part of Masters of the Backside, a group that played live just once at a church hall in Lissom Grove, London. How did that group come?
We never did.
Well, that's what I wondered. That's what I wondered, Chris.
That's not true.
Yeah, I wondered that. It was
we rehearsed in Listen Grove in the church.
Ah, right. So it was a total rehearsal band.
And what happened, because Helen of Troy, she used to live kind of next door, and they knew the people that ran the church. So we used to get the place for like £1.50 for a Saturday afternoon or something. And it was that. But the real thing in Masters of the Backside came with, that was Malcolm McLaren's idea.
He put it together.
Kind of, yeah, well, we're kind of stepping back a little way. But the deal with it was that he wanted two singers who were both coincidentally called Dave. One of them was Dave Vanian.
Yeah, go on.
Very dark and everything. And the other one was Dave, and I can't remember what we called him. But
Sid Vicious wanted to join as well, I've read. I don't know if that's true, mind.
I don't know.
No.
That's true, he might have done.
Anyway, that's probably just publicity, isn't it?
But Malcolm wanted to put this band together, Masters of the Backside, and Chrissy was playing guitar and wasn't singing. I'd heard her sing, and I realised that it would be quite a waste if she didn't. That was that. And I mean, really, it was a thing probably rehearsed 3 or 4 times. And, but of course it meant that I knew Dave Vanian, and when me and Brian finally ran into him, and were looking for a singer, it was, it was easy to invite him down to try out.
Yeah.
Stuff. That, Brian liked the way he looked and the way he was. And I think that's kind of partly where the Sid Vicious thing comes from, because Sid was supposed to be coming down as well. And I'm not sure what happened, but he never did.
Well, the rumour I heard is that you intentionally didn't tell him where it was going to be.
No, we wouldn't have asked him to come down if he didn't want him to.
That's ridiculous, isn't it, that? That's a...
Well, it'd be silly to invite somebody to come down and audition and then...
Not tell them where it's going to be. Honestly...
Sorry, whoever said that hadn't thought it through.
No, Chrissy left and the band became The Damned. I mean, how did the band morph into The Damned?
Well, it was still me and Brian, and once David had turned up and we found him, it became, well, who can we get as a bass player? And the only person with bass guitar and an amplifier was the captain, Ray Burns, as he was. So, almost for convenience sake, to be honest. It
amazing,
meant that we could get the band moving and started, yeah.
It's a great name. I mean, who came up with it?
It was Brian, really, I have to be honest. And there were 2 sources of it. One was based on the John Wyndham book on the Rich Cookers, because there was a film out at the time called The Village of the Damned, or The Children of the Damned.
Yes,
Brian's idea was that if these children had grown up with guitars, we'd be that band. And then the other one was Tony Visconti's The Damned was out and about at the time when it was very sort of dark. Those were the kind of 2 places where Brian got the influence on what.
What I wanted to know, I mean, you've gone on record, as far as I can work out, that you feel Bernie Rhodes and Malcolm McLaren intentionally wanted to create a new scene. Yeah. Reflecting back as someone who became actively involved in the scene, at what point do you remember the word punk being used and it becoming this fantastic movement?
I'm not sure. I think it may have been Sex Pistols review that Nick Kent wrote, or there was something in a gossip column that said, not like a real punk band like the Sex Pistols. And that was the first sort of time it had been applied. But other than that, it was all about Punk Magazine from New York, because that was around. There's always the debate of what came first, the London punk scene or the New York punk scene. Well, the New York punk scene was happening, and the Ramones and Blondie and everybody in CBGBs. But we'd never heard any of them. None of them had a record out. And so we'd go and collect our dole at Listen Grove Dole office. Yeah. And then we'd go around to the record store and look at copies of Punk Magazine and look and try and guess what Richard Helen and Voidoid sounded like. So it was quite interesting. I think, the kind of, some of the concepts of torn T-shirts, short spiky hair and, winkle picker shoes. I don't know where the thing came from, but pretty much we'd look at it and kind of go, oh yeah, signing and what have you. And then it wasn't until much, I mean, really the truth is television. Little Johnny Jewel was the first kind of record from that scene that we heard in London. And that was so far removed from what us and the Pistols were doing that it was like, wow, they're playing by a different set of rules.
I'm intrigued because people just think, right, it happened in '77, everybody's a punk. But it was very subtle, wasn't it? I mean, people were listening to music, like you say, that was out in the US. I mean, Charlie Harper's told me it was all because of the Roxy. You know, he used to go along to the Roxy, and it was really all dominated by bands like the Ramones, you know, being played there. And then it suddenly, you know, morphed into the scene. Is that sort of your memory as well?
Well, yeah, kind of. I don't know. I remember we were very lucky because we were in with Nick Kent and Caroline Coon. And I remember, I can't remember who it was, but I remember being with Paul Simon and we just got a copy of the first Ramones album and we listened to it at his place and it was just like, you know, great record. But I think we managed to get advance copies before, you know, that whole kind of Roxy thing started taking over. But I guess for most people it was. But because I think we were in the centre, you know, we were in the heart of the city. So
weren't you?
And we sort of mixed well. And we, like I say, we mixed with a lot of those journalists and stuff. And so we were kind of well appraised, and we had friends in the record store, and you know, so we kind of had our finger on the pulse probably a bit more than Charlie had done.
I reckon. What a vibe you must have gone through there. It must have been a great feeling. You know, at the start of something.
I'm not sure what you mean.
Well, didn't you sense that you're at the start of something, you know?
Only that you were at the start of something. Not what it was, or whether it had any content or value. It was only about, you know, that in a lot of ways, you see everybody in that very early scene, you know, there was a pub in Portobello Road we'd all go to on a Saturday afternoon. Cook and Jones would be in there, and Nick would be in there, and Tony would be there, and a few other people who were around that never bothered to go in the bands were there. And, you know, we'd meet in the pub, and the one thing that was always very obvious was that we all had the same kind of social misfit thing, or generally speaking. None of us really agreed with things that were going on, or, you know, what was happening around us. And I'm not saying that we all sat there, you know, making plans, but they were all very easy people to hang out with. And you didn't really, you know, have to worry about upsetting anybody. It
was difficult in those days. People don't realise it, to be your own person, wasn't it? It really was.
The great public weren't really used to it either, and so there was a lot of, you know, getting chased down the street and stuff like that going on, and you know, a lot of sort of, well, I guess violence, but, you know, and always being stopped by the police, and always getting, you know, the usual stuff that you know, I suppose it's a passage of rights, really, but
maybe
that was just being hassled. And the thing was, you had nothing to lose. You know, you were going to get that kind of stick anyway, so you might as well, you know, look even more outrageous and even more trouble. It was a laugh as well, because,
right?
You know, and you could feel the contempt off the guy collecting the tickets at the station. And God, bloody hell, you know, you never had this lot in my day, kind of. You know, that sort of Dad's Army attitude. Yeah,
but having said that, it was dreadful unemployment. When we arguably had very heavy-handed police in those days, and society was exceptionally, not like today, it was very conservative. So, for instance, after that Bill Grundy interview with the Pistols, how difficult was it playing music at that time when you had this label of being a punk?
Well, that was kind of when it exploded, and that was a game changer. You know, the band had been out on the road for a while, done sort of shows in some clubs that weren't quite so afraid to take a chance on a punk night, because a lot of people would go, a lot of beer would be sold, and everybody was kind of happy, or generally speaking, everybody was happy. You know, as soon as it became profitable, a lot of people changed their minds about punk rock being unacceptable. From the Grundy show, I mean, that was when everybody went, oh, what is it? And that was when it was time to take sides. Generation that were just slightly younger than us, who all, you know, suddenly went, this is mine.
Yes.
You know, this belongs to me. This isn't my big brothers. This isn't my dad's or my uncles. You know, they've got Genesis to listen to, but this actually is my generation speaking, and and so suddenly there became this sort of surge of football terrorists and pretty much any group of youth that were hanging about and feeling pissed off, as you say, with unemployment and not having any money. Mind you, I will address unemployment in that, you know, the last thing I wanted was some piece of shit job.
Yeah, absolutely. Really. Well, you didn't deserve it. You didn't deserve it, did you?
underqualified and working in a factory, it's never going to be fun.
And the fact you're such an intelligent guy and you're your own person, I mean, you don't deserve that sort of job, do you? You were the exception to the rule, a punk group that was musically competent from the get-go. What was the musical chemistry like between Brian, Ray and yourself in those early days?
It was all about me and Brian. The thing was that I wasn't really sure what a bass player was for, or what they did. I just know that most bands had one. But for me, it was always about working with the guitar. That was the kind of sexy noise going on. Well, we were raised on that. The whole sort of, the previous generation to us was about drummers and guitar players.
Yeah,
I
see.
It was Townsend and Moon, it was Mitchell and Hendrix, it was Bonham and Page, it was, that was kind of the combination. I think we were probably the last generation of players that had that sort of not being tight with the bass. That was sort of kind of a more commercial mentality that was already around but didn't really apply to us.
So in a sense, Ray was still learning the bass and you didn't particularly feel it was that important?
The captain already played the guitar, so he needed scales and things like that. So it wasn't that we had to kind of show him the notes or anything like that. He was musically adept enough to pick up the parts. So
I got you. It's just a guitar.
I think the interesting thing about his bass playing on the first album was that he hated playing the bass, so he kind of did everything he could to fill in the slots with the guitar solo.
Nice one. Eventually record companies were falling over themselves to sign punk bands, but, I wanted to ask, how easy was it for the Damned to get signed by Stiff?
Very. We chose them, really. They were making such a noise at the time, being independent and new, and actually very abrasive on the rest of the industry. But, they kind of had a record coming out with the Pink Fairies and a Motorhead single, and they weren't like anybody else, and we heard about that. And then we went and played this festival in France and Montenegro, and Jake Riviera was there with Nick Lowe, and we played, and that was kind of that, really. He just came up to us and said, right, we'll do a single, Nick will produce it, and we'll do it when we get back from England. Yeah, it was great because it was what we wanted.
In October 1976, New Rose by the Damned was the first British punk song ever to get released. Thinking about how enormously important punk is to so many people, even today, how proud are you of that fact?
Oh, I don't think about it, to be honest.
You should be proud of it, though, man.
Well, I probably am. But the thing is, nothing that we did was deliberate, really. Takes
away from it, does it?
If you sat down and made a plan and... Well, I don't think it takes away from it. It just means that it was actually quite, in a funny way, a very natural thing that had a life of its own. I mean, the thing that I always found amazing, because Meet Me came out, and it was like the number one in the Sounds poll for, like 10 weeks or something. We said, this is great. We've got this sewn up. And then we were knocked off the number one spot by the Saints. Fucking Australia. How did a fucking Australian know about this?
My goodness.
What's going on here? How does that work? And you suddenly kind of go, well, you know what? Actually, this is a thing that is being born. People are kind of, it's going to spring up everywhere. And so, because it wasn't an intentional thing and it was obviously belongs to everybody, it's very hard to take responsibility and a great deal of pride in being...
I get that sense you're a great team player.
I regard everything I do as fun. You see, it isn't a job, it's not. I mean, so when I write songs and play them, I really just enjoy the process.
You should do.
Because I don't regard myself as a musician. I don't regard myself as one. But
you are. I mean, PhD's a great album. I love it.
And the scales. Yeah, but that's the kind of point, isn't it? Is that you I create it because I enjoy doing it, and for me, it's a great experience because I have no idea of what I'm doing other than
I got you.
If I'm playing this note, then I wonder what it will sound like if I go to this one afterwards, and then if I do that, and then what can I do next to that makes it sound even more like a thing, and that's kind of the whole way I've done all of them. I do all of my records pretty, all of my songwriting is done pretty much like that.
Great.
It doesn't take much to be inspired. It can be, just a drum roll.
But, looking at New Rose, the drums are a very important part of that record, and it's credited to Brian James. But how much was there that sense of collaboration with the sound of that record?
Very much. I mean, Brian had the guitar intro, and I thought it sounded a lot like the New York Dolls Jet Boy Jet Girl. And we both loved that song and thought it was a great tune, and we liked that. But it did sound a little bit like it. And Brian just said, well, how can we take away from it? And it was, well, you know what, if I do this, that will make it work. And it did. It's purely one of those flash in the pan moments of how can we get around this issue? Well, that's how we'll do it. The thing with Brian and the Damned was that, nobody told anybody what to play. It was my job to make sure they didn't have to worry about what the drummer was playing.
I got you.
And we spend a lot of time in rehearsals of what do you think of this? Should we try it like that? Maybe do it like this.
I see.
But generally speaking, Brian's guitar playing pretty much dominated the way things were done. It just happened that I kind of, worked with that.
So you'd come in with the guitar running through the song and have some ideas, knowing Brian, he's an ideas guy, and you'd fit in with it, really.
Pretty much. Yeah, for the first album anyway, that was kind of how it was done.
New Rose is a great song, one of the best songs of all time. One of the best songs of all time, believe me on that. The next song you released, Neat, 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 was also a great song. Now, I'm not convinced that the singles weren't selling, so why did these two great songs not chart?
I think New Rose did. It went in at something like 63 or something, didn't it? Something really kind of.
Yeah.
But of course you have to realise, even having a record out was a really big deal for me.
Yeah.
I didn't think I'd get that far. That was something to
really
have suddenly done those things. Yeah. You kind of, it's what you want to do and it's what you dream of doing, but you don't actually believe that it'll ever really happen to you.
Yeah.
And then suddenly there you are, and there's this piece of plastic, and you're saying, well, that's kind of okay, but it's not a real record company, is it? It's this tiny office in Notting Hill Gate who had them made, it's not like being signed to the EMI or anything, so there's still a part of you that's saying, well, you know what, it's not big time, but...
There was another mountain to climb.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
But you climbed it, because, the bottom line, it's a great song, and Neat, Neat, Neat was a great song, so whatever anyone says, don't be deflected by the fact you've made some great songs.
I think that was always Dan's strength, and always has been throughout the band's entire career. But, certainly to the best of my knowledge while I was in it, that it was always about the tune and having a great melody and good hooks. But we only ever made records that we liked. And I think that's one of the things that always made the Damned songwriting kind of stand out, is that we weren't trying to appeal to the top 10 or we weren't trying to appease an A&R department.
Damn was your first album release. What are your memories of touring that album with Mark Bolan?
Really hot, really sweaty, quite a lot of fights, bad food, sitting in a cramped van. It was all of those things that you see in movies about groups started out. We did do all that. Too much beer. I could never believe that they would give us beer every night.
The riders. And
there was a part of the thing that it was like, well, we better drink it all.
I have all this.
You might not be there tomorrow.
Absolutely.
This bubble could burst as quickly as...
No, understood. Was there a difference between touring the album in the UK and touring the album in the US atmosphere-wise, playing live?
Well, we never toured it in the US. They did CBGBs.
That was the only gig, was it?
And those were the only gigs we did, yeah. And then the kind of band fell apart. We did it, and then that lineup sort of stopped working. So that was one of Brian's reasons wanting to do the reunion gigs we did a couple of years ago, was because actually very few people got to see it, the original lineup playing.
I just wanted to know if there was any difference in atmosphere, because I would guess around then in the UK it was pretty aggressive with the punk movement kicking off. So was there a difference when you did those couple of gigs in the US? Yeah,
they were not ready for it.
Right.
There were tables and people who ate pizzas and ordered drinks while the bands played.
No.
That was in CBGB's.
Was it?
And we were really, I was quite outraged. I was thinking, well, this is supposed to be the happening punk club.
Christ, yeah.
And everything, but really it's just an old shithole where people are sitting there watching bands to be entertained. There was none of the kind of belief in it. That from what I saw when we first went, they hadn't really got it. And I think, the British took it as a lifestyle. And,
big style.
This is how I'm going to live. And I think the Americans it was like turning on the TV and going down and watching, it was entertainment for the audience. It was almost a Warholian concept. The audience didn't really believe in it because they hadn't really been shown what it was. It was just kind of, this. And remember, their punk scene really was, the Ramones.
Yeah, true.
And a lot of the bands that used to be on at Max's and things were really just kind of glam metal bands that were very fluffy and didn't really, have much to say. And I think, and because you can't really call Blondie a punk band.
No, it's not the same at all.
You couldn't really call Television a punk band.
No,
you couldn't call
Patti
Smith a punk artist. So none of those kind of groups that were the sort of core of CBGBs actually sounded like that. Or
got you.
From, the Ramones. For me, they were the only really kind of genuine.
Yeah, I understand.
That's unfair on Blondie and the others.
No, but they were a different sound. I mean, there was so much passion in the UK punk scene, and we had so many fantastic groups. We had you guys, we had the Pistols, we had the Clash, we had the Buzzcocks, X-Ray Specs. I mean, it goes on. I mean, amazing times for music. Your second album, Music for Pleasure, was produced by Nick Mason, but how serious were you about wanting Syd Barrett?
Well, we did want Syd Barrett to do it, and we tried to get him, but the truth was he wasn't well enough.
No.
At the time, whatever it was, he wasn't functioning in a way that could make a record,
right?
Especially for us. And I think the idea was that, there weren't as many songs coming. Brian hadn't written as many songs for the album, and I think people sort of thought, well, if we have somebody like Syd Barrett, it can be psychedelic and it'll be all different, and maybe his alternative left field thinking will change what we've got and we'll turn it into something. But he just wasn't around. I think the idea was the management and the other people was that the association with Pink Floyd alone was worth having. Mason took just as much acid as anybody else back in the day, so maybe it wouldn't be so bad after all to have him doing it. I think he did a really good job with it, I don't think he did anything wrong. I think the record was out of time for the Damned.
You say that now, don't you?
I think it sounds like a much better album now than it did then.
But nonetheless, you were dropped by Stiff. You, as far as I understand it, left the band as soon as the recording of the album was finished. So can I ask those two questions? Why were you dropped by Stiff, and why did you leave the band?
The dynamic of the band had changed, and Brian had brought in an extra guitar player, which, much as I really love Lou and think he's an amazing player and everything else, I never thought we needed him because we had Brian James, for Christ's sake.
Yeah, exactly. Great style.
So that was my kind of take on it. So I said to Jake Riviera, I want to leave and I'm kind of done with this. And he said, well, if you leave now, you'll mess up the album for the band. And if you still feel the same when you finish the record, then you might as well leave and at least you've done the album. So that was what happened. And I did stick it out. We went off and sort of for a while. But it just wasn't particularly great. I ended up getting a good kick in and going home.
Getting a good kick in? What do you mean by that?
Well, I had enough of it when there were three blokes punching me, and I could see the band standing there and watching. It was kind of the final nail for me. The artistically, socially, we obviously weren't on the kind of, we weren't gang buddies like I think we were. And it was, time to move on.
Well, that's it. But you did regroup in April 1979 without Brian James, and you went on to release what many of us think is your best album, Machine Gun Etiquette.
It's funny how things work out, isn't it? Well, I think, thanks to Brian, because Brian did that many songs for Music for Pleasure, he encouraged us all to write. So we suddenly had to sing about, maybe it's not that difficult to write a song, because you can look at a guitar lick or a keyboard and it's on there somewhere. All you have to do is move your fingers around in the right order to get it. And then you have something that's music. And so with that kind of philosophy, we went off and did our own things for a while. And then me and Captain, we both had our own separate bands that weren't particularly going anywhere. So we decided that he and I were together again. And we had some tunes, we started putting them, and then when it came to we had to sing, it became, well, Dave was the front man, and let's get him back and we can be the band again. Yeah, and the captain didn't want to play bass anymore. He never liked being a bass player, so he wanted to move on to guitar. And Brian, at this point, there was no way he'd have come back into. So everybody was kind of happy.
Yeah, no, I'm glad it worked out, because I'm so glad that you produced such a great album. But why did you come up with that title? It's a great title.
Giovanni Badamo, the journalist, came up with it, because we were never very good at writing lyrics. That was one of the lines on it, Machine Gun Etiquette.
Sort of links to the sound, I think. But the album includes 2 great songs, in Love Song and Smash It Up, in my opinion. But there are plenty of other really good songs, such as I Can't Be Happy Today, Melody Lee, Plan 9, Channel 7. The first time I saw you was on Top of the Pops performing Love Song. So I've got to ask this. What are your memories of putting that song together?
I was watching a musical on TV, and it was a real kind of Busby Berkeley Moon and June sort of thing.
Oh, yeah.
And I was listening to the lyrics, and I thought, I can do that. And so I wrote the lyrics to Love Song pretty much.
Great.
And then gave them to the captain and said, hey, what do you think of these? And he said, I've got a piece of music that will work just fine with that.
And you fit the 2 together.
And we just slotted the 2 on top, I think, yeah.
Great song. Great song.
And that whole album was sort of cooperative effort. I mean, we were really lucky to be with Chiswick Records at the time, who openly encouraged us to write and get into studios and discover how it worked. And so Captain and I would start working at sort of lunchtime and go until about 1 in the morning. And we would just put down anything and everything that came into our heads, and whatever we had an idea for.
I am
and that was pretty much how it.
I'm so pleased, because what a comeback.
And even Dave had Plan 9 and stuff, and doing that amazing vocal at the end. It was one of those things where I think the band was probably at its most unified throughout.
Yeah, I mean, you can sense it. You really can. But, for a brief period of time, Ray, or Captain Sensible, became a solo star in his own right with his #1 hit, Happy Talk. In what way, if any, did that affect the band?
Well, massively. First of all, it meant that he was very rarely available to do gigs or to do anything. We didn't have a contract at that point in time, I don't think, with the label. So the only thing we could do would be live shows to earn any money. And, of course, if he wasn't there, we couldn't even be doing that. We did manage to do a few things. We did everything we could to kind of hold it together. And then we were being looked at by a record company, I think, CBS at the time.
Yeah.
And they heard some demos that we'd done, and they pretty much said, yes, we'll sign the band, we want you. We just want to see you play live. And then they changed their minds. And it was pretty much because they felt that there was a conflict between, Captain's playing and the fact that he was on TV all the time, all over the place, and Dave's, and that the 2 couldn't really work together. And that became quite obvious to the rest of us that, really, it just wasn't working out anymore. And the Captain was going off the whole thing because he couldn't do the touring or like he used to, because he was burnt out from being Mr. Happy Talk.
Very difficult. But was the ego growing around that time with what was happening with him? Did you sense any change in personality there?
I don't think it can do anything but change you.
Yes.
I think, when you suddenly catapulted to #1 and everywhere. And don't forget, it wasn't only Happy Talk. What was a massive hit in Europe as well.
Yeah, it's a great song, what?
But he was constantly out milking that, so I think, and also he suddenly, had loads of money. Things like, buying £100 cocktail and, just because he could. I don't think it was necessarily because of his ego, but I think it was just because he could do those things that he did. Well, it was very natural departure. It was quite obvious, he'd chosen his solo career, and that was kind of where it had left us. So we still had to do something. We weren't going to quit because of it. And at this point, we had Roman in the band and Bryn. So the whole thing was, we were absolutely in place. And then we did the Young Ones TV show, and I looked at us all in our ghoulish makeup and thought, this is so long overdue that we should be, really being promoting Dave Vanian,
Yeah, well, that's what happened, more or less, wasn't it? Because, I mean, you had the Black Album.
And that was exactly what happened.
Yeah, because that took you toward that sort of darker sounding goth direction, which, you could argue culminated with the album Phantasmagoria and the single Eloise, that great cover of the Paul Ryan song. I mean, how did you feel about that?
I was very happy with it.
Yeah.
I mean, we'd done the Black Album, and that was our experimental thing, and that kind of gave us a understanding that we could do anything we wanted. Really, whichever direction we chose, we were kind of, we were good with it. And a lot of our audience were good with it as well, because, nobody expected Curtain Call to be popular with the Damned crowd.
Yeah.
Because everybody was still kind of regarding us as that high-energy punk band rather than,
that's true.
A band capable of something as prog rock as a 17-minute long track.
Yes.
So when it came to Phantasmagoria, it was kind of, it's actually time to do this properly, and to get that deal with a major label, and to make sure our image is together, and then we played the game, really. And we were very lucky with Roman coming into the band, that he was a very prolific writer, and so I and Dave, not all at the same time, but we all, write together, and that was, how Phantasmagoria kind of came about. And of course it was going to be different, because, Roman was then in the band, and was kind of joining with us and creating his melodic style over things. He was a neat fit after the Captain, and of course, that was the most successful period of the Damned's career.
You were no longer a member of the Damned after the group's 8th studio album, which was released in 1995, Not of This Earth. So why did you decide to call it a day then?
Short truth is that they really wanted a solo career with the Phantom Chords. He was getting increasingly reluctant to do Damned shows and work, and the two careers were getting in the way. And I could see the Damned was starting to slide a little bit.
Yeah.
There weren't quite as many people turning up at gigs, and the whole thing was a little bit unstable. And I knew that Not of This Earth wasn't ever going to, it wasn't going to, there wasn't a New Rose or Smash It Up on the album. But I thought it was a fair enough kind of album to keep the band ticking over for a while, until we kind of got our shit together and wrote a proper record. But that never really happened, because at the same time, I think Dave said the same things, and just decided that he, wanted to focus on the Phantom Chords instead. And I realised that wasn't going to work for me, because, it was hard enough keeping the band going as it was. So I decided to leave, and that was that.
Knowing you just felt that was that, so you got on with things. But, looking back now, you get the impression Dave, Ray and yourself have strong personalities from the outside. I mean, there's no way of us knowing, really, because we don't know you well enough. Looking back, how easy were Ray and Dave to get along with?
Oh, very. We were, we were all pretty tight. There was always a great sense of humour that ran through the band. Believe it or not, Dave Vanian was a very funny man when he decided to be.
But, do you feel that you're mates with Ray and Dave?
No.
Not really. Time's moved on.
Dave, Dave's always been a gentleman, and he's a very difficult man to dislike, to be honest with you. So I've always had a lot of time to be there, But the Captain is, I don't know what's gone wrong there, but something happened, so I'm not really that bothered about it.
No, you no longer...
Brian, I still get on pretty good with, I speak to him quite often. He's down in Brighton, so, sometimes we get together and go down and do stuff. So it's all, it's not so bad.
Well, it's like anyone else, isn't it?
I'm not sure about that dwelling in the past.
No, definitely not. It's like anyone else. Yeah, can I just put on record, it's like anybody else. I mean, you have close relationships for a period of time, and you went through a lot, but you move on, don't you? So can I move on now? Since The Damned, you've kept busy musically, working with people such as Neville Staple, the members, and even actress Jane Horrocks. People wouldn't have expected you to have worked with Donovan. What was it like for you as a punk icon, working with Donovan, who was very much almost a 60s icon?
I think it's about the song, and he's got some great songs, and he's a very iconic figure. A friend of mine's married to his daughter, which was the kind of connection there. And when it came up about doing it, but I had to say yes to doing it, because it was, just because he's a guy that did Mellow Yellow and Sunshine Superman, and to play those
great songs.
Was the originator. And also, it was the first time he'd ever been on the road with a band. So it was kind of nice for that aspect as well, that, you know, it was something special. So, no, it was good fun. I like Ben. He was a good boy.
That's good to hear. But the new album's coming out on May the 18th, called PhD, Prison Hospital Debt. What was the thinking behind the title?
Today.
It's today, isn't it? It's coming out today. It's come out today, guys, so this is perfect. And get out and buy it, because it's great. What was the thinking behind the title?
I like the idea of Sacabies having a PhD.
You have in music,
get one anywhere else.
You have in music.
So I did that, and also in the Prison Hospital Debt. Those are kind of all things that were going on around me. And the debt was my own, so it was really a bit of a gag, you know, with a sense of irony to it. That,
I see.
You know, a PhD. Yeah, in my world, it means prison hospital.
I love it. I love it. Thanks for explaining it. I think it's. I love that. I love that title now. Thank you. Apart from Louis Prima's Sing, 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 you wrote all the songs, and apart from the bass, play all the music. Can I just say, how does it feel, certainly with me in any case, to know that with Chew on You, you have a guitar sound that's a meatier version of Brian James's?
I think a lot of that sound comes from the attitude that you play it with, rather than it being a tonal or the amplifier thing. And I think, you know, it's. I think you have to believe it.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does. It's very passionate. I love it. I honestly was blown away by your guitar playing. Absolutely blown away. I think everybody else would be as well. Away from the drumming, you show on this album, for instance, with the piano on Sing, 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 and the slide on Benny's song. What a tremendous facility you have for playing different instruments.
I don't play the piano on Sing, Sing, Sing.
Oh, do you not? Okay.
That's my mate Joe Atkinson. The thing is, I'm good at bits of things, you know, so I can kind of put together some of it. And then sometimes I have a mate who comes around and he's a proper piano player, and I'll say, hey, I've been working on this. And like the Sing, Sing, Sing really was, I was going to do a big kind of techno version of it in Guyana and do it as a modern big band. But Joe came around and put the piano down, and I just listened to it and thought, it's such a great song as it is.
Yeah, no,
you know, and just the parts and the arrangements and the melodies and the dynamics of it. It was like, actually, I'm going to leave this exactly as it is, because there's no trickery on that. No. And it stands up, it just magnifies the song for me. But the thing is, you know, I kind of play a bit of keyboards and a bit of bass and a bit of guitar.
You do, don't you?
I only sort of construct as a bit at a time, you know, like I said to you before, if I sort of
it's great stuff,
pluck out a few notes and go, that sounds like a song. It's very gratifying when people say they like it.
I love it.
You know, I wasn't really looking for a result.
This Rat's Opus is a very classical beginning. I mean, the bottom line is it's just so damn varied. I mean, the nearest trademark damn-sounding song is Chew on You, isn't it? But even that is arguable. Were you thinking, I'm going to make it as varied as possible?
No, not really. But then once I'd done it, I'd kind of realised how eclectic I am. And how actually all of the songs reflected a different kind of mood or a different thing that I was up to, or a different place I was in. You know, so it's all kind of very personal like that.
It's a way to make music, isn't it? Just to have fun. I mean, I totally support anyone who does anything to have fun, quite frankly. I think it's what everybody should do with passions that they've got. And I love radio, you know, and that's my passion. Freudian Slip references your membership of the Saunière Society.
It kind of does.
You know, tell everybody about the Saunière Society. It's
a collection of free-thinking kind of ideals, really, that's pretty much alternative. Anything that's alternative and not considered the norm, if you like, on scientific, religious or political things is kind of what interests us. That, you know, there's 1% of things in this world that are unexplained or unexplainable.
A bunch of people that want to know the truth about the unexplainable sort of thing. Is that a fair comment?
Absolutely. And it ranges from, you know, from Egyptology to flying saucers to yew trees. And
just to make people aware, the Freudian Slip song that Rat does, it has conversations about people, and they're clearly spotting or trying to spot UFOs in the evening. Now, that's actually one of my passions, funnily enough. So my theory is this, you know, there are people that believe we are regularly visited by aliens and always have been, okay? I think possibly you might be one of them. But the thing is, if that's the case, how can we possibly connect with them if they're almost certainly more advanced than us?
On the one hand, I spent time in Phoenix, Arizona, and nearly everybody that lives in that town regularly sees UFOs.
Really?
Shape or another. Or
really? It's like that, is it?
Yeah, and it's all there and you see it. And that's because, you know, the military have got their secret airbase just up the road, a couple of 100 miles away, and when they're testing stuff, it's up there.
Okay.
And I also got that first-hand from somebody, but that's a long story, and I'll go into that some other time. But,
yeah, okay, fine.
You know, so there's this whole thing of the military going on. There's a lot of natural phenomena that happens as well that kind of makes things a bit spooky and a bit weird, and we're not really sure what we're looking at. Then my counter argument to that is, but it only takes one of these things to be real.
I agree.
And the whole game changes. I don't think we get the choice as to what we say to them. I think we have to wait. We have to wait until they tell us what they're doing or what they want.
Yeah,
or
they'll make it clear.
Something else. I find the whole thing fascinating. I was just reading a story about Richard Nixon and Jackie Gleason.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've heard that.
No, tell me.
When Richard Nixon came, they were playing golf together and got on quite well, and then that evening Nixon turns up at Jackie Gleason's house and takes him to a secret Air Force base.
Does he?
And shows him UFOs and alien bodies.
Oh, really?
Then Jackie Gleason's wife put it in her biography, yeah. And then when Jackie Gleason was asked about it, he said it was all true, because he was really big on kind of paranormal.
My goodness, that's a great piece of information. I know you feel to a certain extent you've had your time, you know, as a musician, as a popular musician, shall I say. But the thing is, you're a gifted musician who enjoys knowing whether others like what he's created. I mean, I can tell you like the fact I enjoyed your album. So can I ask you, what are your hopes for PhD?
I'd like people to say that I'm a good guitarist.
Well, this is just people like me.
I don't know. I think I spent so many years being that Sacabies in the band. There was the mad drummer bloke who set
true.
Kit.
Of course.
And I think it's quite, and you know, that's why the Grail thing was kind of cool and having the book out and everything, because that kind of softened that edge, and everybody sort of went, "Oh, hang on, he's a bit more capable than just setting fire to a drum kit." And then now with this record, I think that's kind of like, oh, actually, you know what, you can, you know, he kind of gets music as well. You
are very musically literate. There's no doubt about it. I mean, guys, get a hold of this album and listen to it.
Well, thank you.
I get you. But
yeah, thanks.
I love
it.
You've
just got to move your fingers in the right time, in the right place, and you'll get something back.
I know you're doing the Q&A sessions in the UK, but at the heart, you are a musician. You're a drummer. In this era of the free download, I'm beginning to interview new artists who don't expect any living at all from releases and view touring now as the only way to make money. So with this sort of environment around us, how bright is the future for a musician, because you are a musician, Chris Miller?
I don't know, but someone's got to figure out a way to pay us. Otherwise nobody's going to be able to afford to do it. You know, nobody will do it at the stop. Because I think now a lot of people expect their 15 minutes. They expect to be on X Factor. And
the X Factor generation, oh my God, yeah.
I think the pleasure out of playing in a band, well, just getting together with your mates once a week, drinking a shitload of beers and not feeling intimidated because none of them are really any better as a musician than you are. I think that's the thing that's really missing on it. And what's the drive? Apart from you want to do it, you know, and it's kind of, there's less and less reasons for it, because I'm not seeing many guitar heroes these days. I mean, there's a few kind of, I mean, there's bands with guitars, but there's nobody where you sort of go, wow, you know, this guy makes me want to do that.
Music without passion, is that what you're talking about?
I think so. I think we got very clinical. I think everything is quantized and perfection is achievable. It is achieved now on records, and I think that the warps and the burps and the mistakes that are often made in the background that give things character, even though you don't even really hear them sometimes. You know, what makes it, and now you kind of, the burps and the farts and the whistles get taken off. And it's too easy to do, and if you go slightly out of time, somebody puts you in time. And I think that's the kind of emotional thing. You know, some songs are supposed to speed up at the chorus, because they're more exciting when they get to that part. There's that element of it that I think makes it kind of bland. And I think it's a part of the human trait of seeking perfection. That's why we like That's why we like laser beams and bubbles, is because they're a perfection that we don't see in nature. You know, and I think people try and achieve the laser bubble technique on the records these days, which I think is kind of a mistake. And I prefer the Mickey Spillane school of, you know, if I didn't get it right the first time, what makes you think I'm going to get it right the second? And actually, please don't take my personality away. Don't put me inside. Leave me slightly out. I'll judge whether it's right or not, you know. Don't just make it perfect because you can.
Well, there you go. I mean, Chris Miller, the one and only Sacabies. Pleasure to have you on RETROPOPIC Radio.
Well, thanks for having me.
No worries. Keep doing what you're doing. It's great.